I want to welcome everybody to our online speaker series centered around Quasi experimental writing systems. I am Lavinia Lascaris, the exhibition and graphic designer at Hoffmitz Milken Center for Typography here in California.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ximena Amaya. I'm the graphic designer at the HMCT.
This series that we are presenting is centered around exhibition Quasi experimental writing systems, which Ximena and I designed and curated together with Simon Johnston. The exhibition, which is currently on view at the HMCT Gallery in Pasadena, is about invented and fictional writing systems.
As we like to say, Quasi lives in the intersection of typography, linguistics, and fiction, showing writing systems that, unlike those that have evolved organically over generations of collective usage, were created at specific points with intention and purpose.
And we'll put links to the exhibition in the chat in a bit.
This online speaker series was curated to add to the dialogue of Quasi, to offer some insight into what instigates language creation. We've had from science fiction, language preservation, and in this case, personal expression.
There are 4 sessions in this series, and this is our second session, for which we invited Calder Ruhl Hansen and Elian to be our speakers. They are both showing work in the Quasi exhibition, and today they will be discussing the process of designing personal writing systems as a fusion of individual identity, artistic vision, and cultural influences. And we'll let them introduce themselves properly, but just briefly, Calder is an artist and designer who has created multiple intricate scripts, some of which he will share with us today, inspired by mathematics, linguistics, and patterns.
And Elian is a creator of Elian Script, an alphabetical script rooted in the Latin alphabet that echoes the aesthetic qualities and expression in Asian calligraphy.
Just a few maintenance points before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentations, please put them in the Q&A or the chat. We'll try to get to as many as we can after both presentations.
Yeah, we're very excited about this series. So thank you, Cici and Calder, for agreeing to be part of it. And thank you, everyone, for attending. We will see you at the end for the Q&A.
Right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending. And thank you again to Lavinia and Ximena for organizing this. It was really wonderfully lucky for me that I graduated from college last year, and then they just happened to be putting together this show about this exact weird specific thing that I enjoy doing. So it's been great to work with them. So I'm going to be talking about 2 things. I'm first going to be going into some detail about this writing system called D16 Syllabics, and I'm going to talk about my process of starting with a challenging constraint for designing a writing system, and how I used inspiration from other writing systems and mathematical concepts to create something that was usable. And then I'm going to talk about a different approach to designing systems that focuses more on the artistic power of shapes that are filled with information. And these systems are not designed to be read or written easily, but are instead meant to break out of the limitations of traditional writing systems to produce new types of meaningful shapes. So I will start with D16 Syllabics. So a few years ago, I took a course on the history and anthropology of writing and writing systems. And the final assignment was to design a syllabic writing system for English. So this is how this system got started, and I've since developed it after this class was over. So a syllabic writing system for English, meaning each character has to represent 1 syllable. And the simplest way to do this would just be to list every English syllable and come up with a symbol for each one. So how many English syllables are there? How many symbols would you need? So there's not one right answer to this. It depends on what counts as a word, what sounds count differently from each other. But based on the sources that I was using, I ran a program that counted a lot of syllables. This is way more symbols than I would want to make, and way more than anyone would want to learn. So I needed a way to simplify this. And to simplify this, it helps to consider why English has so many syllables in the first place. Partly that's just because there are a lot of sounds. in my dialect, at least, there are around 24 consonant sounds and 15 vowel sounds, which is more than a lot of languages have. But I think the main reason why English has so many syllables is that there are a lot of ways that they can be combined. English is pretty flexible with how you can combine them into syllables. So there are plenty of consonant vowel syllables like ba, and this structure, consonant vowel, is common in pretty much every language. But English also has a large number of consonant vowel consonant syllables, which do exist in other languages, many other languages as well. But there are often, at least in many languages, there are often restrictions for which sounds can come after the vowel. Like, as far as I understand, in Japanese, you could only have n after the vowel. But English, you can put pretty much any consonant afterwards, which creates a huge number of possible syllables, many of which are used in actual words. And then you can also put multiple consonants in a row to make clusters, just giving a few examples of those. And it can get pretty extreme. So how do you deal with all of this diversity of syllables? This is a type of problem that has been solved before. As far as I'm aware, all real, like, natural syllabic writing systems primarily represent just consonant vowel and vowel only syllables. And these core types of syllables, as I will call them, are each written with one character. So consonant vowel like ba, that's one character, and a vowel only like ah, that's one character. And then for all the other less common types of syllables like these, you would write them using multiple characters. So you would use, like for consonant vowel consonant, you would take the core consonant vowel syllable and then add one more symbol for the other extra consonant. And all these other structures can be handled in a similar way by taking symbols for consonants and adding them onto symbols for syllables. So I could just do this for English, but the thing is, in English, these other types of syllables are actually more common. Like, if you analyze how frequent each of these structures is and add them up, these ones are a majority. And so if I applied this idea here that I was describing, a majority of syllables would have to be written with more than one character, which does not feel very satisfying, given that the whole point of a syllabic system is that most of the time one syllable can be one character. So to figure out where to go from here, I'm going to break down this distribution a bit more into each of the individual structures. And so it should now be clear that the great majority of English syllables are one of these four types, which are all the types that don't have any consonant clusters. And so ideally, there would be a way for each of these, at least, to be written with one character. And all the other ones with clusters can be written by taking one of those cores and then adding on extra consonants. So given this, if we're only trying to make up characters for these, how many symbols do we need? So earlier I counted around 9,000 total syllables, but if I'm restricting it to only these four types, there are about 3,000. And so to make a writing system here, then I would need a symbol for each of these, 24 extra symbols for each of the consonants, for a total of around 3,047 symbols, which cuts the number of symbols down by 2/3. And I could just stop here. This is a feasible number. Many writing systems throughout history have had similar numbers of symbols. If this is, I think, less than the number of symbols that are commonly used in Chinese. So this could be learnable, but I did want to see if there was a way to simplify it more. So at this point, I took inspiration from Canadian Aboriginal Syllabics, which are used to write Cree, Inuktitut, Ojibwe, and some other languages. And I think these also came up in the last session because they're pretty cool and inspiring. So in this writing system, consonant and vowel syllables are represented by taking a shape that represents just the consonant sound and then changing its orientation to represent the vowel. So here's the symbol that's used for all the ch syllables. And then depending on its orientation, it either means ti, to, te, or ta. And so I could just do the same thing for English. And that would be something like t, ti, te, te, ta, 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 tu, tu, ta, te, tai, toi, to, tau. And I think you will agree with me that this would be hard to use because it is not really possible to easily distinguish all of these different orientations. So back to syllabics for more inspiration. One thing I did not mention earlier is that most, or maybe I think all of the languages that use this system, many of the vowels have both short and long versions. So O and O are treated differently, which means that many of these symbols actually represent two different syllables. And so that might seem like there'd be problems with ambiguity, but that's not really, like, pretty much any writing system has some things that could represent multiple things. Like in English, looking at these two words, in this context, you can tell that the A is a and this A is ah. Similarly, someone who's reading syllabics can use context to tell whether it's a short or a long vowel. But the system does also provide an optional way to clarify whether it's short or long, which you can use if you want to by adding a dot to indicate a long vowel. So the writing system kind of has two forms depending on how specific you want to be. And so I decided to apply all of these similar ideas into my system. So this is the symbol that I'm using for the sound d and related vowels. I'll explain where this shape comes from later, but I'll just use this as the example now. I chose to go with 8 orientations, so still twice as many as Canadian Aboriginal Syllabics, but I think this is manageable. I think this is about the limit of how many we can easily distinguish. And some of these orientations represent a single vowel sound, while other ones represent 2 or 3 vowel sounds. And like syllabics, when you're writing these these symbols, you can choose whether to just write them and let the reader determine from context, or you can add dots either above or below to be explicit about which sound you mean. And these exact principles can also apply to consonant, vowel, consonant syllables. So this is the one that's used for get and all the related vowels. And so you can see here that the same basic symbol is reused to write 15 different syllables, which greatly cuts down on the number of symbols that we need. And I realized that it could also be possible to reuse them even more. So far I've only been rotating the symbols, but I realized they could also be reflected. And I decided to use that to reverse the syllable. So this is da and this is ed, get, teg. And then these flipped shapes can also be rotated to fill out all the vowels, which means that each symbol now has 16 orientations, which can represent up to 30 different syllables, which brings the final count down to around 300 symbols necessary. So now that I've gone through that whole process, I still have to come up with the actual symbols themselves. So where did the symbols come from? I decided that it would be easiest to remember the symbols if they were pictographic, if they represented specific words that you can write using those symbols. So I'll show you a few examples of how that process works. So I'll share about that syllable da, ed, that I showed earlier. So I knew that this symbol, whatever it looked like, would be used to represent all of these syllables. And some of these syllables are words on their own. And I selected one of these that I knew that I could draw, and I drew a picture of it. And this is a more complicated picture. So I simplified it, fit it into a square, simplified it some more to produce the syllable that I shared earlier, or the symbol I shared earlier. And if you just saw this shape without knowing the context, you would not be able to tell what this was supposed to be. It does not look like a day. But the point is not to clarify it for someone who's never seen it before. The point is that if you have seen it, if you've learned it, it's a lot easier to remember if you have this kind of mnemonic. And I have experienced that myself anytime I've ever tried to read something I've written in this system and I forget what a symbol is. It's a lot easier to remember if I have an association with some word than if it's some meaningless shape. And then for the next syllable that I shared earlier, this one derives from the word gut. And this on its own would not be a great character because it has too much detail. Here in the middle is just too detailed. It's a lot taller than it is wide, so it wouldn't work in all the different orientations very well. And also, this is quite symmetrical. It's not asymmetrical enough to be easily distinguishable in all 16 orientations. So to deal with all of those, I will figuratively remove this person's gut and put it on the side where it can be a bit bigger. And now that there are these two things side by side, it's not clear how these two things are related to each other. So I will indicate where the gut originally came from. And now each of these gets simplified to produce the final shape. And then for one more example, let's say you wanted to write the. This one is a bit harder because, similar as the other syllables, each of these, it's going to be written with a symbol that represents all these different syllables. And some of these do represent words, but none of these words is anything you can really draw. Like, how do you draw though? So for situations like this, I designed a phonetic system which produces symbols that represents how your mouth makes sound. So in this case, when you say the th sound, you touch your tongue to your teeth and let your vocal cords vibrate th, and these parts combine into the symbol for the and and all these other ones. And to get math nerdy for just a moment, which I guess is appropriate given that it's Pi Day, each of these symbols can be turned into any of the other ones through some combination of reflections and rotations. And this particular structure of relationships has a name in mathematics. It's called the dihedral group of order 16, or D16 for short, which is where the system gets its name. And there is more I could say about the system, including, but something you can see here, which is that some of these symbols have these symbols above and below, which is how I ended up going with the sticking extra consonants on. But in the interest of time, I will move on. And if there's something you want me to go into more detail about, feel free to put it in the Q&A and I can answer it later. So for the second part, I'm going to be talking more generally about shapes that have meanings. And this is inspired by a certain feeling I get when I look at a mass of text like this, or in pretty much any system that looks interesting and that I can't read. When I look at something like this, I feel kind of in awe of all of the information that is before me. And this is this feeling that's also evoked by any kind of structure that is dense with information and structure and system, not just writing, but it's often evoked by writing. And so I've been interested in exploring this feeling artistically and thinking historically. So obviously throughout history, writing systems have been developed for practical purposes of representing meaning and information. And as kind of a side effect of this, the shapes that are produced feel compelling because you can feel that they have meaning, which is what I was just describing for all of these. But this side effect can also become a goal in itself. You can make writing just for the sake of evoking this feeling of meaning, evoking the power of shapes with meaning. So one example of this is an average ancient Egyptian person could not read hieroglyphic writing. But if they saw a monumental inscription like this, I think it would evoke the same feeling of awe that I was talking about earlier. And if you are a ruler hoping to project your power with monuments, that feeling of awe is an important tool you can use. So writing is being used here because meaningful shapes carry power regardless of what they actually say, just the way they look. And similarly, writing systems have also been considered to have magical powers in some cultures, like this runic amulet. So while with D16, I focused on practical considerations like how easy it is to use and learn, I have also more recently been working on systems that live more in this other zone, where the primary goal is endowing shapes with meaning. And it doesn't really matter as much whether those meanings are actually easy to access. It just matters that you can see that there is meaning. And in particular, I've been interested in broadening the scope of what types of shapes can be endowed with meaning. And what I'm thinking about here is that while the shapes that are used in writing are quite diverse, the overall texture of writing is pretty much always some finite set of shapes arranged into straight lines. And so I've been interested in seeing what other types of shapes can be made to represent meaning. So here is one system that does this, explores these ideas, which I call contour code. And it works by encoding text into the outlines of geometric shapes, which may be arranged in any way as opposed to linearly. So here's an example. The way you read it is way you read one shape at least, is by going around the sides in a clockwise order from the bottom. And then with each of the sides, you record whether it is straight or concave or convex, which produces a sequence of sides like this. And then looking just at those sides, you can decode this using something similar to Morse code, a system that I created, like an encoding that I created just for decoding contour code. So in this system, straight, straight, concave, concave represents Y. Convex straight represents E, and straight, straight, convex represents S. And it's the system is designed so that it's always clear where the breaks between the letters are, so it's always unambiguous. And I have, if you're interested in learning more about how to use contour code, I'll put a link in the chat of a short video I made describing it. So one of my goals with contour code was to make a system flexible enough that any possible shape or set of shapes can be interpreted as text. So here is a picture of Saturn. If you interpret this as a two-dimensional shape, you can read it with contour code and it produces this gibberish sequence. So most things that you would read produce gibberish, but I think, as I said, the power is, the goal is more to create the sense of meaning and the power of that, and not so much about what the meanings actually are. But this example only really worked because the shapes here are smooth and they have clearly defined sides and vertices. And most shapes from nature, and plenty of human-made shapes as well, are too rough for contour code. Like, how would you read this? How do you divide this into sides? There's not really a way to do that. So more recently, I've been working on another system that really can interpret any shape, including fractals like this one. It works by taking a black and white image of the shape and representing it at higher and higher resolutions. And at each step, it records information about which pixels have changed. And that information is recorded using binary digits. And so representing an image at higher and higher resolutions produces a long string of digits, which can then be decoded as text. And the more detail the image has, the more text it produces. So this is the system that I call resolution code. And I haven't yet built a tool that lets me read an image. This is only something I've been working on in the last month or so, but I do have a tool to let me write in it. So I'll show you just writing some sample text. This is from that corpus of text that I used for the analyzing the syllables earlier. These are all like randomly selected sentences from the internet that start with "I think," which I feel is a fascinating way to peek into the landscape of human experience. So this is about, I don't know, 10 kilobyte text file, which is fully represented by this shape. This is not something you could ever read on your own. You would have to use a computer. I mean, it is possible to do it. I did hope to design it so that it's something that you can at least understand what's going on. It's not just feeding it into some black box. But the process of doing this by hand would be extremely tedious. And so it would be it's better to have a computer do it for you. So here are a few more examples. And then to finish it off, I will just share using this system interactively. So I will write so each letter, as you can see, takes some of these gray pixels and subdivides them into more detail. So I will write hello. And trying to find some example that has more black text. So as you can see, as I'm just writing, it makes the outline more and more detailed. And you could just go to infinity with this. You could have a shape that represents something arbitrarily large. And this system has an especially interesting property that I tried hard to preserve, which is that every possible string of text is represented by exactly one shape, and every single shape is represented by exactly one string of text. So this is about where I am at the moment in these explorations. I still have to think about how to make things that look like this, that are still clear to an uninformed viewer that they actually mean anything. But I think, yeah, I've shown kind of the two sides of exploring writing systems, both for practical purposes and for more artistic purposes. So thank you all for listening, and I'm looking forward to hearing any questions you might have. Thank you again for hosting this.
Beautiful work, phenomenal. We have questions and comments, but I'm gonna pass it on to Cici before we get to a conversation about any of the projects.
Thank you, and Calder, that was so neat.
Thank you.
I wanted to start with this slide, which shows the earliest form of Elian Script. And the transformation is absolutely essential to its identity. The final form, which you see on the right, it's because of this form that I was asked to participate, because the earlier form would not interest anyone very much. And I will here, just to recap, the script is based on a 9-square grid with the alphabet distributed. And I was looking for a code, and this is what I found. And you can see if you take any of the 9 unique quadrants here, if you put a 1, 2, or 3, you can identify one of 3 possible letters. And that's the basis for the code then and now. And all the transformations were based on the need for flow, to keep writing across the page. And so I didn't intend to change it. It was just that I would look for a way to modify it. And then I would just adopt it. And I had time on my side because I was happy with the code at any version that it had. So here at the beginning, you see the earliest one. And I realized, oh, the numerals can drift out. It doesn't change anything. And then because the numerals were so specific and the quadrant shapes also, here I can put more slanted lines. It doesn't change anything again. Then the dots start to replace the numerals because it's faster to write with dots. Then the 2 dots would bleed into a dash. So now it's a dash for the 2 and 1 dot for 1 and a dash and a dot for the 3. And then at that time, I also changed the center box. It became a circle because it's still an enclosed space, just like a square, but a lot easier to write with. And then the dashes slant because nothing's lost and it's a smoother way to write. And then at some point, I didn't lift the pen anymore and the dash got connected to the quadrant. And then again, later on, because everything is sort of serendipitous, it just happens when it does. And The bottom picture, I was constrained for space because this was a tiny little notebook, 3 inches by 3. I started to stack the letters and realized I don't need the 1 for the dot. I can just make the first letter indicated with equal lines because the dash was already connected to the quadrant. And this liberation of the numerals made it possible to go to the separate letters. And so you see this example when I wrote this, where I decided I'm not going to use common walls anymore. When I saw this, I realized there's a lot of graphic potential there because you can start to stack things as long as you're moving left to right. There's no ambiguity. And I happened to do something on the right I was writing something for somebody, that's the word Evers. And because I use the script for my own thoughts to study language, I'm not trying to do any particular design or calligraphy. I'm not a calligrapher, but I knew others could take it a lot further. And to do that, I had a website, and still today I post examples to show first calligraphers what they can do, because it's not currently possible with Western calligraphy to do the same kind of creative process as with Asian. But because the script here is made of lines, you can do the same process, which is very different because you're drawing and you're writing at the same time. So on the upper left is a Asian stone engraving. And here on the right is something I did to show that it can approximate. I'm not saying somebody can't do it better. I'm sure they can. This is one of the scrolls from the Art of Now. And then to show a looser version, because I'm such a fan of the ancient calligraphy. And here you see this scroll, the Chinese one is from the year 1095. And to me, this looks as contemporary as many of the works that artists have done, like Twombly or even Bryce Martin, who was one of my teachers in painting. And then the even looser version. So Chinese on the left and Elian Script on the right. And because I saw this potential, I thought if I place seeds, the internet will do the rest of the work, because I didn't want to disseminate the script myself. I was too busy doing my own research into forms, into languages, looking for universals in form and things like color, all sorts of systems, graphology, numerology, to see if any of them had universal validity. And most of them are culture bound. It's basically only the very pure shapes that have some universality to them. So at the time, I was calling it conceptual calligraphy because it was the idea of calligraphy. And it kept that name for quite a while. I had uploaded it or contacted the Omniglot website, which is an encyclopedia of writing systems. And they very generously, they printed the code. And I figured interested people would find it and do their own work. At some point, somebody did a workshop called Conceptual Calligraphy in the UK. And I thought, well, that means they're doing something different with the same name. And at that point, I decided to just call it Elian Script, because it's just a script of the Latin alphabet. It's not another language. It's not an arbitrary system. It's very systematic. And that was actually a very good move to call it Elian Script, because then it's associated with my own name, CC Elian. And on the right is a PDF that shows some of the works I've done. And a lot of the works are meditations or reflections on certain themes. Even though they have gallery applications, they're always, in my mind, byproducts of a thinking process. I don't even know how I became an artist. I just sort of followed things. And every time I tried to give up being an artist, somebody would offer me a show somewhere that I couldn't resist. And so to this day, I continue. And here, this is from the reddit.com Elian Script forum. And this is work that other people have done. All the work is correct. It's true to the system. And there are so many examples that I didn't even know existed until I had to research for this presentation. And I'm really thrilled when I see the things that people have done. Here's some more. I mean, you can Google Elian Script and look at the images and see what they've done. The center one is a logo for a potential newspaper. It's called the Elian Archer. And here, people have done a Python script, converter. This is on Wolfram website, Unicode, fonts, or even tutorials. Peter Draw's tutorial on the bottom left spread the script a great deal, and it's reflected in that top left, which is for children, because children learn this script quite easily. Somebody did an app that they didn't update, but I had it for a while and worked great. Minecraft, tattoos, and then the comments, the top comment was a bus driver who taught it to a second grader and practiced with him. I think it's a him. And then fonts, of course, many fonts. But the thing with, the thing with the fonts, and let me see if I can get this to play, is that they don't, this is an excerpt from that wonderful video that Lavinia and her team did in the exhibition. Fonts don't take advantage of the dynamic aspect, where you can lengthen any line, you can put the dots, the dash for the third position anywhere, where you can stack letters. All of these other fonts are static, and some of them are really beautiful. But here, this shows that you can put angles in things. You can have different strokes. Here, this is also shows the variables. This is the letter S, can be written many different ways. The baselines can shift as long as you're moving left to right, top to bottom. And it was important to me that the script not be ambiguous. Here's the word horse, which we'll see again later, written different ways. And you can write some of these hundreds of ways. And the part that is important to me is that you're not distorting the system. You're not leaving it. You're absolutely true. So unlike Latin letters, if you start to do artistic things, you're sort of leaving the system when you're not doing the standard calligraphic styles, but you want to have different proportions between letters. It's segregated to the calligraphic system. It's not considered part of the function, the way that the Asian calligraphy, we almost always associate with calligraphy because it has allowances for this art aesthetic, I would say. And also this aspect of entering the line, and the line becomes the person. I mean, it's very graphological, the way Asian calligraphy is viewed, and you can get a lot of credit for your line. In Asia, they recognize that the line can represent the character because you're moving through space. How do you manage the forces that are surround you? And it's true of a line on a page and a person going through their lives. And so, oh, I see. And here's how I use the script. I use it to get out of the effects of being solely dependent on the Latin alphabet, because using that alphabet, the way we have to shape the letters requires maintaining certain proportions, conformity, straight lines. You're not considered literate or functional if you don't do that. And that will requires the left hemisphere in general, the vast majority, let's say. And so you're developing a skill set that focuses on analytical thoughts, on order, on math, on science, and all are good things to develop, but you're not developing your right brain. You're actually not going between the two with the corpus callosum, which doesn't get a lot of credit, but that's really the connecting aspect of the brain. Whereas logograms, they foster the development of the right brain and the whole holistic aspect, the tonal aspect, intuitive, all these things which you see reflected in Asian cultures, the group, when you get information as an Asian person grown up with that writing system, how does this affect the group is your first thought before how does it affect me, which is what happens with Latin letters. If you want people who are in Western Latin cultures to do things that are good for everybody, you have to tell them what's in it for them first. And that's shown in how they sell solar panels. They sell, there's 30% more commitment when they tell the person what they can save by using sustainable resources. And today there's a cross-pollination because for the China to enter the business world, they can't use these logograms, or as Calder mentioned, there are thousands of them. And so they have pinyin, sound writing, which transforms the sound of logograms into Roman or Latin letters. And then because the West has been so exposed to the East, not just through the internet, but the New Age, the thinking about Eastern global, universal, collective viewpoints, you have emojis, which is, they're pictograms because they're supposed to show things, but they have that same aspect of group reference in the sense that an Asian logogram, if you've never seen it before, there's no sound that you can extract from the lines. Someone has to tell you, and the emojis are supposed to be pretty clear, but some of them have slang interpretations, and you won't know that unless someone tells you. So there's this wonderful cross-pollination, but there isn't one system that incorporates both, except the way I look at with Elian Script, for example, you are writing in sequence with Latin letters, because that's the basis, but you're also drawing because you're working exclusively with lines, composition, and also how you feel. So it expands on logograms. And here you see the word horse in Mandarin. You can only write it that way. If you start to take lines away or move the relationships, you are presenting a different logogram. Whereas with the script, you can write horse many different ways. You're not outside the system. So the system allows you to move differently. It allows an element of self-expression that is not possible if you write a logogram. You have to be correct in what you represent. And the advantage of the script over Latin letters is that if you presented the example on the right showing variations where some letters are larger and smaller, or different baselines, you would definitely not get the job. You would even, be considered dysfunctional. Graphologically speaking, you would say something's wrong because the system requires predictability, conformity, sequence, order, and that's also very characteristic of societies that use Latin letters. And efficiency, function, pragmatism, that's valued, not self-expression. And here with the script error, you see the word variations. Well, you have all these baselines, and it's much harder to write a word with this many letters the same way than it is to just write it the way you feel in the moment. And because of this freedom of movement within myself, because I can write and move across the space in a much freer way than with Latin letters. I do works that reflect on things. This is called 66 changes in a day. because the I Ching, which I think is a wonderful portal, I realized, well, if you throw 64 hexagrams at once, you're not going to get 64 unique ones. So somebody had to put this together. And yet it's used to go into transcendental information. And so I threw in one day 66 of them, or maybe how many? And the changing lines to show myself, to prove to myself that these are ordered systems, that hexagrams and I Ching's an ordered system. And I can tell you, when I first started just to keep throwing, there was sort of this feeling I was violating something. But at the end, it turned into the hexagram truth. And I think that from this, I got the realization that these are portals. We're telling ourselves things that are at deeper layers. And when we go into divination, whether even going to church, whatever the method is, we are giving ourselves permission to access information that we already have at a much deeper and maybe collective level. This one is called Beauty is Not a Four-Letter Word, which I did because somebody told me my work's too beautiful to succeed in today's art world. And I got very incensed, not at the foretelling of my lack of success, but at the disrespect to the beauty, because beauty is a power, and you see it in mathematics and physics, and there can never be too much beauty. And so I just wrote this stream of consciousness artwork to vent. And ultimately, by using the script, it transformed me. I found myself doing things very differently in my life, making very large movements across space, where I would move from one side of the continent to the other, or I would just move to Europe. And people would say, well, that's a big change. And I would say, it isn't. It's just, it's just me. I'm still here. So it's just a change of environment. But I realized the script made me comfortable with lengthening my movements, because you can lengthen any side. And I came up with this concept of now, which is to me a merger of this Western Latin alphabet approach of pragmatism in the moment, no roots, independence, and Taoist thinking, the Tao, nature, collectivity. And two of the scrolls are in the script, which I was really happy when Lavinia asked for me to send them. And so that's where I am now. So, and I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about my work. So that's it for me, Lavinia, and everyone.
Wonderful, Cici. Thank you so much for sharing beautiful work. We were saying earlier before we went live how Ximena and I have been so familiar with your work since we started putting together this exhibition, but hearing the stories behind the projects that have followed you and for many years and have followed us since last summer, it's been really quite a treat. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
For the audience, if you have any questions for our speakers, please put them in the Q&A. I do have one question that I would like to get this Q&A session started with. What would you say, and this is for both of you, what would you say is, what creates this urge to design, to create an alphabet? Where does that come from, do you think, in your cases?
Calder, as you wish.
Yeah, I think I talked some about this in my presentation. It's that feeling that I get when I look at some form that seems to be dense with meaning, and trying to create new types of forms that can be filled with meaning in that way. And I think it's also just that I always enjoy creating systems of any type, and I mean, and it allows me to kind of combine the more mathematical or algorithmic influences with type design, which I also have some experience with, to a pursuit that I think, as I was talking to Cece about, kind of relates both sides of my brain to each other.
Right, yeah, I remember that. I think what motivates me is that I'm not like I need to think about things to understand where I am, because I think being alive is very strange anyway, and I think that's a success if you can not forget that. To me, that's the background. It's very strange to exist at all. And socialization has made us so functional, and we can occupy our time. But in times of crisis, people try to transcend their circumstances. And so I look for ways to not be boxed in by social expectations or frames of reference, especially frames of reference. And so because I think we get information from other senses, not just the words in our head. We get feelings, gut feelings, and intuition and guidance. I mean, that's been my experience, and I want to keep those channels open. And for example, I've done that other alphabet with color. It's systematic, the visible light spectrum, equal wavelengths, 26 equal wavelengths. And you can write words with colors, and that gives you a feeling for languages, because if you take a word in English, you translate it to German, for example, and you see, oh, this word is very cool colors in German, but it's in warm colors in English or Spanish, so that you're using other senses. And if you do it long enough, you can read it. You can easily read it as if it were letters, but it's coming to you like through colors.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think that also has been an ongoing conversation with all of these projects on how language can shape the way you think and the way you behave. So it's great to hear your point of view on that, Cece.
Yeah, and I the point I make about it's the language for sure, but it's also the way you have to write the language, the physical, the brain-hand coordination. I think that shapes how we prioritize information.
It's interesting that you say that. That was one of the first things in our initial proposal with this exhibition, when this concept hadn't formulated itself so much. One of the first phrases in our notes were, writing is a psychological and neurological process. And
Absolutely.
from there, we got to where we are.
You can test it yourself. Just write a letter. Let's say you've got some conflict going on. Just write a letter using words or a keyword in that, and you can see the letters will change. Graphology is a valid thing. It's just badly framed. But how somebody moves, and if you can read the line, you can see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think older structures are really important and very informative, and have an effect, like you say, Calder, that these blocks of writing systems, there's something about them that is impressive.
We have one question for you, Cece, in the Q&A. That's a technical one about how your system works, how you arranged your vowels. I'm going to read it out loud. How did you decide to distribute the Latin letters into your grid? It looks like you purposely divided the vowels so that they weren't doubled up in the same block ever. But is there any other ordering you took into consideration?
No, if you look at it, I just followed the alphabet. There's no arbitrary placement. You're just like a spiral. You start at the bottom left, you go up, and then you go down and up and down and up, and then you start all over. So the letters are just in sequence. They just fell where they fell. Does that make sense? It's just in order. And I saw the grid actually when I was studying something Pythagorean and Pythagoras's use of numerology. And I saw this grid, and then when I realized the 9 sections, I thought, oh, I just have to differentiate between 3 letters.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why it's easy. A lot of people learn this. I've seen many posts. I just learned this 45 minutes ago. I wrote something. What do you think? The simplicity of it is what was essential to spreading it. I mean, people really spread it. I didn't do much more than what I showed because I trusted that the internet, people are interested in certain subjects and they communicate with one another. And if you have time on your side, then, things will just spread. That's why I call them seeds.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea of how many people are using it, or is that there's no way to measure?
No idea. If I go in and take a look, I see more and more stuff. People write to me from like Sweden or Australia. And there's many more than I don't see. Not everybody posts, for example. Calligraphers have seen it, like a letter arts review, because I submit things for the juried show. And one time I called and complained about the paper because they changed papers, and it's a quarterly, and the editor, who was brand new, she happened to like my work and wrote an article on it. So I encourage people to complain. It gets results.
Calder, a question for you. You've shown me other projects from the past that you haven't presented today, but generally you have so many different approaches to your different scripts. And I remember you showed me one project where you had designed different typefaces for. And my question to you is, once you figure out your system, how do you decide, from a typographic perspective, the look or the initial look that your writing system will have?
Sorry, I was opening another window and left where I was. I think I'm going to share my screen with this is a portfolio document to put together for something, but it has all of the systems that you were talking about. There's some contour code, but let's see. Yeah, so this one is one of the ones that you might have been thinking about, which has like a mono weight style, this more contrasty style, this kind of blobby style. And then the one that I've really developed out is this one, which I use as a form of shorthand, maybe somewhat similar to how CC uses her system. And it has all these different forms. With this one, it happened very naturally. I just use this all the time. And I'm quite comfortable with it, and I'm comfortable being expressive with it. And so just any of the types of doodles that I might naturally do, as a type designer, any of the doodles I might naturally do with the Latin alphabet, I do similar things with this system. So some of it just comes from messing around. Really, that's most of it. It's just like I have the skeletons, as you have here at the bottom, in the same way that you can have skeletons of the Latin alphabet. And then I'm just always interested in how many different ways can you apply different forms to these. For D16, I have only pretty much done this one calligraphic style, but I would be interested at some point in seeing how I could explore that further.
Looking at that, it reminds me, Calder, when we talked on the phone, talking about, these systems can look like it's somebody exercising their creativity, but I think it also develops a bihemispheric experience, that being able to get information that normally you would rely on text to get, but you get it from forms, that you're really activating so much more of your mind, and that these are things that would be good just as practice, like yoga. You don't move around in your regular life the way you do in a yoga studio. You're practicing stretching aspects of yourself, and that engaging with these kinds of writing systems is very beneficial. I mean, I'm convinced of that. And one of the slides that I showed, let me see the one that's where I had the right makes right thing. Hold on, let me see. See that book, The Right Makes Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's something I wrote that discusses how writing systems influence our way of thinking and prioritizing information. I mean, I can't overstate the effects of the writing system and how it develops qualities in us. And the world today, I think, needs both. It's just so obvious to me that we need to have a much more, not just accept, you don't just accept, but realize that has value to see the world in a holistic way, and it has a value to develop your individualism.
Okay. We're a bit over time. Any final thoughts, Ximena?
Yeah, not really. Thank you so much for sharing. It was great to get some insight. Like Lavinia said, we've been working with these projects for so long, but it's very special to hear from you specifically. Yeah, I don't know. We could chat about this for hours.
Yeah, we really could. Before we let everybody go, just want to announce the next 2 sessions of this Quasi online speaker series. Next week on Thursday, March 21st, at the same time as today, we have language representation and preservation with Ibrahima and Abdoulaye Barry, the 2 brothers that created Adlam, a language for the Fulani language, and Zeke Oyinloye, who is an artist also in the exhibition in Quasi, who will talk about his project Kiko, which serves the Yoruba language in West Africa. Thank you again, Cici and Calder, for sharing your incredible work with us. It's really, really a treat. Thank you everybody for attending. We hope to see you next week. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention the 4th session, Writing with the Natural World, with Marianne Hoffmeister and Patricio Gonzalez and Yu-Chen Chang on Tuesday, March 26th, again at the same time, 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific time.
Thank you both, Lavinia, Ximena, Calder. I really enjoyed the process of going through the experience, so thanks a lot.
It's been lovely getting to know you two, you personally and your work, so please keep in touch.
Yeah, take care of you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.